Hello, everyone. My name's Walter Borchenko from B3K in Toronto, Canada. We just had a false start, so believe it or not, we started talking to everyone thinking we were live and going, so sorry for the delay. Um, I'd like to start out with a couple of housekeeping notes. We're using GoToMeeting for this session, and all of you see a dashboard on the right-hand side. We welcome questions, and there's a question area in the dashboard on the right. If you turn the little triangle, you'll see at the bottom that you can type in questions and comments, and obviously we can look through those. So Andrew has actually broken the information up into a number of sections, and we'll stop at each section. We'll try to answer as many of the questions within that segment that we can, and then we'll do it again. We also are going to do a poll partway through. It's a very simple poll. We're not looking for a lot of information there, but it'll be an opportunity for people to just say whether they're an architectural photographer or not. So with that in mind, I'd like to start by a little bit of the description of my history with Andrew. We first met back in 2012 when Andrew, as an architectural photographer, was looking to move from a DSLR to a technical camera and a medium format phase back. So at that time, Andrew in 2013 decided to move ahead with an Arca Swiss Arm 3DI, the Rotoslide sliding back for stitching images, and a 43 Digitar soon after, followed by a 60 Digitar and then a 32 Rodenstock. And Andrew will talk about some of the other things he's added to that since. I've been shooting with technical cameras and view cameras for most of my life, so I was kind of the knowledgeable expert, and I was somebody who Andrew used as a guide. But that relationship over the next few years very quickly completely flipped around. And we're all passionate as photographers. We focus on particular things that give us interest, and so the amount of time we put into that type of research starts to define us, but also allows us to create images other people don't see. And very quickly I started to learn from Andrew. So what became really obvious is that many of us, and I think that goes for most of us, we shoot buildings sometimes and we think we've done great architectural images, but what we've really done is just recorded the image of that particular piece of architecture. The architect has created the perfect spot to stand and totally appreciate the structure and the graphical elements or whatever has made that spot really work, and we've recorded it. That doesn't make us architectural photographers. And as I got to understand more and more about what Andrew represents, I started to appreciate that what makes an architectural photographer is not standing in the perfect spot and creating this fantastic image, but taking any spot and trying to understand the context and what all of that combines with to create kind of that magical expression of a space and what it means. And to me today, I found Andrew to be quite a mentor in terms of shooting spaces and places. So without any more from myself, I'd like to introduce our main speaker, Andrew Latreille.
Thanks, Walter. Really lovely to hear that. Thanks, means a lot. First, I'd like to thank everyone that's showing up to listen to me talk for an hour or so. It means a lot. And I'd like to thank Walter and B3K, along with Wayne and Francesca and the Phase One family, for really putting this on. I think it's wonderful to do these artist talks. I've listened to the previous two, and they've been really inspirational. It's been a great way to spend a bit of time while we're at home. And I think, Walter, are we able to see the previous artist talks? Do you know? Are they going online?
Yes, we do have the previous artist talks available. If anyone would like to see the one we did with Stephen Friedman, or there's Andrew Dumas as well, they are available. You're welcome to just email us.
Yep. Okay. So I've like Walter said, I've been working with the Phase One system now for like seven, 8 years, I think. And I'm going to talk about this a bit further on, but the simple fact is it helps me make the images that I want to make. It's part of the craft of making a successful architectural photograph. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can explore our vision with the equipment we have. I want to really focus on how, as a creative, we can use the time that we've been given at home in a positive way. Wherever we are in the world, we're currently in this sort of state of transitional flux. Now, I believe transition is a very strong thing to embrace, you know, like it gives us opportunities. And we should use it to our advantage. But perhaps we can all tick off some of that really long to-do list we always have. Part of my to-do list is always to have a process of reevaluation and critique, not only of my own work, but of my creative business. Like, how does my business work? How can I look at it and go, let's improve, or let's move this way? This is an image I made, it's a personal image I made, I think not long after I got the RM3DI from you, Walter, that's in Surrey, and it was really an exploration in how multicultural Surrey was becoming. The building behind it is the library that won a number of architectural awards, designed by Revere Architecture, which used to be Bing Tom Architecture. So if we're going to sort of reassess ourselves and where we are, we have to know really where we come from. We have to know where we are right now, and we have to have an interest in where we want to go. I was born in a country where the trees look like this and the art looks like this. I grew up in a family that had the built environment intertwined into our lives completely. My father, he was a sole practitioner architect. He was mildly obsessed with cars. And I've got to be a little bit biased here, but I think the houses that he made for his clients are probably some of the, what's the word, most timeless contemporary pieces of residential architecture in Melbourne. My mother is one of Australia's leading authors in landscape design and architecture. And I remember in the 80s, Dad, like a lot of architects, he decided to build his own house. Sort of, I suppose it's, you've got the time, you've got the expertise, and the best things about it was the construction site and the guys on site. And there was one particular guy who, he used to give me the salami out of his sandwiches, which, like, as a 5 or 6 year old was just phenomenal. And it was a lot of fun. At the same time, Mum and Dad would continually talk about this good friend who Dad had gone through architecture school with, who was and still is sort of one of Australia's most active and leading architectural photographers, a guy named John Gollings. And for anyone who's in Australia, they will know his work. In fact, I think probably anyone who follows architectural photography around the world will know John's work. And I remember Mum and Dad always talking about his ability to find the spot and how dynamic his use of perspective was. And then he'd make images like this. This is one of John's images from 1982. And it was referential. Okay, so it wasn't your straight shooting type of architectural photography. And what I understand is he was actually referencing Chagall and the goats that he would often deploy in his paintings in an Australian context. Now, like many dads, Dad gave me my first opportunities at things that I was passionate about. This is a photograph of a farmhouse in Strath Creek in Victoria that he designed. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I had like a little Pentax SLR and a zoom lens, and I'm willing to bet there was Velvia in it, but I've got no idea because I don't know where the film is. But what I did get is I did get shapes, and I learned very quickly that I like looking through space. I like to see shapes, and I like to use shapes to move through space. And I think that's still pretty evident in my work today. But when it came around to actually the architecture awards, Dad commissioned his friend John, and they drove up in his car. I think I mentioned Dad likes cars. And they entered in the Victorian Architecture Awards. It's funny talking with Dad because he says that the guys, when they were building this site, would often say that architects can't afford cars. And little did they know that Dad bought this car when he was 18 and he still had it. And then once I'd gone through architecture school, I ended up meeting and marrying an architect, my wife, Elka. And shortly after we moved to Canada, she found a job that specialised in healthcare architecture. This is one of the first hospitals she worked on in Canada that she finished, and I was lucky enough to get the commission to photograph it with my then partner. I was working in an architectural photography partnership with a very good friend. But what really came to me, and this is sort of intrinsic in why I do what I do, I have a very strong basis of my, I suppose, practice of work that is around healthcare, social housing, and architecture that really gives back to society. It's not always the most glamorous architecture, but it's supremely important pieces of architecture for society. And I feel there's a deep need I feel a personal deep need to photograph these and to help these architects give back in any way they can. When I arrived in Canada, I applied to a job advertisement. This is still as an architect, that stated, "We work on remote projects all over the province. Applicants must not be afraid of small planes or bears." And as an Australian 6 months out of his country, I just ticked away and went, bang, I'm going to apply for that. Now, Mark and Wayne, who I worked with for a number of years, have become amazing friends. And during my time working with them, I began to photograph architecture with more intent. I began my partnership with my good friend and gained a real appreciation for BC, British Columbia, which is where we live, and the landscape. Mark and Wayne have this really beautiful way of weaving their projects into the sites that they're on. This is, oh, why are we not going to the next slide? This is a more recent project of theirs. I think this was 2019, and believe it or not, it's take you about 20 minutes by boat to get here from Vancouver. Like, it's actually pretty close, but you wouldn't know it, and it's pretty special. And they do weave their projects into the site. So that's a bit of background on me and how I came to where I am. And I think if we're going to photograph architecture, we've got to understand why. If you're going to be a portrait photographer, you've got to understand why. If you're going to do product, you're going to want to know why. So why am I interested and passionate about architecture? It shapes our everyday lives, whether it's a public space where we can rest, if it's a pavilion where we can play, if it's a house where we can live, or a tower we can work. Perhaps it's a library where we can learn, or dare I say it, a correctional centre where we can relearn. This actual correctional centre was an extremely significant project in Canada because it was the first public-private partnership with the First Nations people. So it's in the Okanagan Valley. It is huge, 400,000 square feet, I think, and we took 4 days to photograph it. Or we might photograph a train station, which is where we move through it. Like, all these pieces of architecture have different experiences, and I'm interested in all those experiences, and I get to have different experiences a couple of times a week in different pieces of architecture. It's fantastic. Intrinsically, architecture of all kinds shapes our society at cultural, social, and economic levels, and I fundamentally believe that my photographs can help these creative people, these architects that shape our lives, for the betterment of all of us. Plus, I get to meet a whole lot of really, really interesting people, and that makes me really happy, and I get to go to some amazing places. I still get to hang out on construction sites, and I don't get as much salami as I used to, but it's still a lot of fun. And then we get to flip them from construction to finished. which again makes me pretty happy. I enjoy that process. So we want to understand our subject matter, and I think for every photographer, this is something that's really important in their assignments. With architecture, there's a couple of main factors. There's a couple of main factors to think through and to wrap your head around. Just going to check my microphone, sorry. Is that any better, Walter? Walter, is that better? Walter?
There, I think you're back. Are we okay? Is everybody getting the audio again? Yep, okay.
Okay, so did it cut out for a bit there?
I think it did, but I think we're back.
Okay.
All right.
All right, well, we need to understand our subject matter. We want to, as an architect, there's a couple of things to factor in. We want to understand the designer or the architect's intent, but we also want to understand what the architecture is saying to you and why. You need to understand why you like it and how you personally respond to it. I think that's a really intrinsic factor in making successful photos of architecture, is how you respond to it. There's no substitute for getting to know the space, and you need to connect with it, feel it and believe it, perhaps have a bit of a conversation with it. This is a photograph at Trent University in Nottingham. Oh, sorry, in Ontario. Trent River is in Nottingham. People architects who I've worked with for a long time have done a lot of work on this campus, as has a very famous architect, Canadian architect called Ron Tom. And it's important to them to show the new building in context of the Barter Library. The Ron Tom Barter Library is the building just out the back, out here. And it was important for them to show the building in context. It sits in a really important place in the campus, and it sort of knits the campus together. No one told me when I got there that it was reading week, and the interiors were full of life. It created a lot of patience to create photographs that just weren't jam-packed with students. But wonderful, what a wonderful place to learn and spend time studying, do exams, go to classes. Just amazing space, lovely light. And I mean, I really live for moments like this where the texture and the life and the light all just line up and things just happen and sing. You'll notice in this, there's a texture on these concrete panels that was taken from a print of the original concrete on the Barter Library. And then they digitally changed it and worked it into a 21st century version of it, which I thought was a wonderful reference. And then we have to think about context. This knitted into the campus. There's the river that runs past, the Barter Library behind. It's easy for us to make these context images now, even easier in 2020, where, well, in Canada at least, the laws for flying drones have got a little simpler than they used to be, provided you do it safely. This is a phenomenal bathroom in North Vancouver. And when you walk into a space like this, you've got to ask yourself a couple of questions. Well, these are questions that I always ask myself. It's like, what is unique? What tells a story? Or what is that story? You might notice there's a ladle on the left. Like, who has a ladle in their bathroom, right? So my client's client really wanted a bathroom that was quiet. And bathrooms are inherently not very quiet. They're full of hard surfaces, tiles and things like that. So they're quite noisy. So how do you reshape noise and quieten it down? Well, you create a whole bunch of bumps in it. So they work, these panels are Corian, and Joanne, with some testing with the manufacturers, worked out that they could slump it over a simple $2 ladle from Winners. So they bought 40 or 50 of these ladles, chopped the handles off, and used it to create these bumps, which I thought was so ingenious, and it just made for such a wonderful feeling within the space. And you want to ask, other questions you want to ask yourself are, what other senses you want the photograph to engage with? What senses do you want the viewer to engage with. Like, I really want to go for a bath right now, you know, taps running, just about to turn it off. Or do you want to create an image that just asks people and helps people want to touch that surface and get to know that surface? This is, for those people that know my work, you might have noticed there's quite a lot of photos from a province in Canada called the Yukon. The Yukon has like 2 seasons. It's got the brown season and the white season. This is obviously the white season. My clients up there are great. They're wonderful, wonderful people, Jack and Tony, and I have a ball every time I go up there. But they never hang around in winter. They just get out of there. So for the first 3 or 4 years we were working together, we didn't shoot a single project in winter. And then after about 3 years, like I've been pestering Jack. I'm like, I should come up in winter, you know, like, it's like your buildings have this context, like, let's do it. And then I get a call on a Thursday night and it's dumping and it's going to be blue skies on the weekend. We've got a project. Can you fly up tomorrow? We had family plans for the weekend, and I sort of went over to Elke, my wife, and said, what do you think? She's like, oh, you've been working on it for a while, you better go. So I had the support there, which was wonderful. And it paid off. We went up. I took the Arca. This is the other side of the same building. This is the setup. Hard light, blue skies, fresh snow. There's the resulting image from that setup. I spent 2 days with this project. It was quite a small educational project at the University of, at the Yukon College. And I had to keep engaged with the family, so I was sending photos home to my son of like how I keep the camera warm, which they enjoyed. This is a tower in Vancouver. What really intrigued me about this tower was how different it is from a typical Vancouver tower. Now, if you've been to Vancouver, like, there was a swathe of just very similar looking towers that came up in the 80s and early 90s. Words I jotted down in my notebook for this project were elegant, or elegance, beak, referencing a bird, uplift, respect, and heritage. The building in front of it, the Marine building, the brick building, is one of Vancouver's oldest towers. This building won a series of awards for the architect, mainly in urban design awards. It also won an architecture award with the local architectural association for its integration into the skyline. So this particular image is a context image, and it's catching the light in a very different way to the rest of the city. It won, and this is again this is showing how it's knitting into the city fabric and how it's respecting that heritage building, the Marine building, and its urban amenity that it created at the ground plane in the city. It was really important the way it created this plaza to the left behind the red car there, and how it reconnected back out into that plaza. And just at a simple level, the way it structurally came alive, which were these glazing bars. If you're part of the Vancouver architectural scene, you will have heard of Peter Cardew. He is a force in Vancouver. He's trained some of Vancouver's current most influential architects. They've all been through his studio. This is words from my book about this project were simple, succinct, and refined. It's a retail space, and Peter and his client, who was reigning champ, they're obviously a clothing company, and we've all got very similar ideals, which sort of made it easy to photograph because we all wanted to do the same thing, and that's like an obsession for detail. Like I've got openly admit I've got an obsession for detail, workmanship and materials, but there's a respect for the process and the resultant. So all these little elements in the project that had been crafted just so specifically for the experience of using them. And this is this central long bench that runs down the middle. But Peter's now since done 5 reigning champ stores. I think there's 2 in Vancouver, 2 in Toronto, and 1 in LA. And I photographed the next store. So how do you create a visual language that ties things together? Well, you take a similar point of view. Lighting's a little bit different, but there's definitely an architectural language there that's similar. So when I photographed this store, you had to reference the previous one to make sure there was just some continuity for his portfolio, my portfolio. Walter, if there's any questions, we could take a pause here.
Yeah, I think this is a really good spot for questions. There's a first thing I'm going to go to is an interesting one, because I know we actually discussed this before the session. On the shot with the building, how did you time the red sports car to show up in the image? I think it's a Ferrari, if I'm not mistaken. What's the story?
Yeah, it was like, you know, we don't. The thing about architectural photography, as opposed to say studio photography, is a lot of the projects we don't have control. So you've got to be ready. You've got to be in position ahead of time, and you've got to be aware of what's going on. You know, if we photograph a house or like this store that's on screen, I had total control because there was no one in the store. We could arrange. We moved those hats about 3 or 4 times till we chose where they were.
Or you could put a person in, right? Like you have that control. Yeah,
we have that control. But the majority of work we do nowadays, and this is also partly. So I'm going to take a little step back. If we go back to 20th century architectural photography, like modernist architectural photography, it was almost devoid of people. Okay, right. There were 2 things. It's about the structure being pure. It was also technical. You know, we were shooting on large format cameras at like 50 or lower ISO film, f64 or f128. So the exposure in the middle of the day was like a minute. So if someone walks through, they're gone anyway. But now we can capture all that in a much more fluid and agile sort of way.
So would you just say then that it was serendipity that you happened to click the shutter and there was a car there and it was the right car?
Oh, I saw it coming from the lights up the road. So okay. Like, I'm aware and it was coming. Yeah.
Next question is, do you ever edit in black and white?
Yes.
Okay, that was a very
I often put them in the proof sheet and the architect asks to see it in color.
Okay, the next question, and again, this is perhaps part of the process because we have people with all types of different equipment, but the question is here, do you ever bracket to create multiple exposures so you can adjust each element in your shot?
When I was shooting with an old Canon 5D Mark II, yeah. But I mean, the advent of like, I'm gonna say Sony here because the phase 1 back that I have now has a Sony sensor in it, right? Sony, right. My understanding, have 25% of the sensor manufacturing internationally across everything, like your car, my webcam, my phone, and they've done amazing things with what sensors have done. And then Phase have taken the sensor that we have in the IQ4, and their color science has mean that I hardly have to touch the images now. Yeah.
Wow. All right. So another question is more about how you crop or you create the feel of your images. And so let me just read it through. In many photos, the aspect ratio is long and short. Is there a reason for this choice of ratio? Is it something that clients request or the briefing, or do you have a creative freedom to choose it? I mean, it's a complicated question because there's so much entailed in that. Yeah,
look, it's an interesting one. When I was shooting 35mm, I would often stitch my images or crop them to a 4:3 or a 4:5. Okay, now a lot of the images we're seeing up here today are not. They're like almost a 16:9. Part of that is I've cropped them a little bit for the presentation. But there was a job in, I think it was 2013, and I scouted it with the architect, and Joshua said, can you please give me some images in 16:9 because they are full screen, which helped me for presentations.
Right.
And that was a point where suddenly I just found architects were selecting wider and longer images, and I began to think more wide and long. I think that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. I'm going to jump to a few more, and then I'm going to stop because we have quite a few questions.
Okay. Yep.
And we'll pick some up on the next break for questions.
Sure.
So the next one is a little bit. I'm not 100% sure about it, so I'm going to just read it out. You link your images to standard architectural views such as sections or elevation views.
Yeah, occasionally. Yeah, and it's part of the early process of what I sort of think of as a discovery period, or what I call an understanding period, is when I'm talking through a project with an architect. They're going to show me a whole bunch of images, whether it's a construction photograph. This is even before I've walked the site.
Right.
You've got to walk a site before you photograph one of these. You've got to know it. And we talk about the, I suppose, the strengths of, we talk about the strengths of particular viewpoints. Right. And the strengths of what they show. Like, I mean, this one we've got on screen, it's what we would term a single point perspective. Now, the single point perspective, that terminology has come from the architects, okay, because they've learned to draw a single point perspective. Okay, now I could have taken a step, say 1 tile to the left, and then if you look at that left-hand cabinet, if I'd taken a step 1 tile to the left, we wouldn't see the right-hand face of it.
Right.
It would change this image significantly to not see that depth.
But in terms of how it's drawn, then your perspective is true to that.
Yes.
How the architect would have drawn that. Okay. Maybe I'll just do one other question, because there's multiple questions about lenses. I've got, what lens are you using? Are you using the perspective control in Capture One? What lenses do you use with your ARCA? Looks like the 32 Rodenstock in some of these images. Maybe you can just talk about your process with the lenses and the view camera, and what relationship the view camera movements have to, let's say, the relationship of keystone correction.
I'm going to say let's hold that question because
there's that for later. Okay, so then let's stop here and let's get you back right into the session. So let's move on.
So I've done a little bit of talking about planning, and I've also talked about understanding. Okay. Back in my younger years as an athlete, I was a big believer in failing to plan is planning to fail. Now, with a little bit more life experience, I'd say that isn't always true. Okay. And would phrase that now to, you need to move forward with intent. And to have intent, you have to have understanding. To create intent, you have to do some planning, because then you sort of know what you're expecting. I do like to plan things out, and I do like to understand a project, and this lets me move forward with intent, and move forward with intent that I know is, I've just lost you, Walter. Are you still there? Okay.
Yep. No, I think what happened was our poll went live.
Okay.
And we've now closed it, and we're looking at how many are architectural photographers. Yes, no, we'll talk about that later, but keep going. We should be back.
So I like to plan things, and I like to understand things. And in doing that, discussions with the architect, you've got to think about the time of year. Now, this one isn't in the Yukon. This is literally about an hour-and-a-half flight north of Vancouver. And you want to think about the time of year, because the angle of the sun, the kind of light you're going to get, and how it reflects your client's work and how it's going to reflect your own response. This is an educational building in Prince George in British Columbia. The architect's Officer McFarlane Bigger, and their work's just so pure and simple. I love it. Words from my notebook were tough, resource. Prince George is a resource-based town. Caterpillar, as in like a caterpillar track. Ripple, rhythm, and refined. They train mechanics to work on heavy machinery in this building. So now we start to see there's a bit of understanding behind the building. You've also got to be ready for the elements. Like this was -35 before the wind chill. This was my tripod head the day before. We were photographing the airport, and that is my breath. We were literally an hour off the plane. So this is the first morning we got into photographing this project. And it was actually my first major shoot with the IQ4. and I really got to test its capabilities out. And it opened up a lot of, and we're going to get into this lens question a little bit, because this is the 43 Digitar stitched left-right to create this long aspect ratio, which to the person that asked that questions was intentional in this image, because I actually really wanted the power lines, because if those power lines weren't there, you'd just vanish out the top right-hand corner of the frame, but they're pushing you back down into the image. That sort of helped with that perspective. But with this new digital back, I can now use a much wider range of lenses. This is the Canon 17mm shift lens attached to my Arca. Now, with the old CCD 60 megapixel backs, we had to use the leaf shutter in the lenses. I've now got an electronic shutter. So that's meant it's opened up a wide variety of optics. I've still got old Pentax 645 lenses. I can use all my Canon lenses. I can choose to create a particular look. You've got to be ready. This is how we got the image. I said Prince George is a resource-based town, and that's tough. If you go to Prince George, you're going to rent a truck, and that's like the Gitzo giant. So I think that it's at maximum height, which is about 9 feet or 2.7 meters on top of the truck to get that previous image. That's Nate, my assistant, who I don't know why he's not wearing gloves, but I was. So you want to, at the same time, make images that are about the season and provide context about the materials. These are some of the guys that have been to class. There is a natural part to the building. I mentioned caterpillar tracks. This is conceptually what this building is about. You know, like, what does a caterpillar track on a big heavy machine actually do to snow? It does exactly this. We had to keep the camera warm because the batteries were giving us 10 minutes, so we had to sort of get creative, and I cut up my laptop sleeve to make basically a wind chill sock. The other thing that we had to do while we were up there, because it's like a super dry cold outside and inside was quite humid, was I had to run 2 camera systems. So I knew the exterior of this building was like the hero side of it, so we kept the phase acclimatized to -35, and we had a small format camera that we used on the interior. So these images were all small format. Nate, my assistant, and I like to have a bit of fun when we're on set. So it's like, how would a student come in, sort of make a few different do a few different things. He's obviously had a beer the night before. He's too tired. And then we went back outside. And this particular image really reminds me of, say, a low, like, flatbed truck that carries big machinery. I was lucky enough to go back in the fall in completely different light, and then the next day got another kind of light. So the same image can be completely different in completely different lights. And then flatbed truck came past. It's just a couple of other images of it. Just texture and material. Wonderful to see it when the landscaping's grown in, as opposed to the snow. This, Walter, for you and for people that look at lenses, this is the 180 rodent stock, stitched left and right. Now, there is more up high to make it a bigger, fatter image, but I think the elongation with this building really, really helps. So we understand the building, and we've got a plan. This project I'm going to show is of a much, much smaller scale. It's a small portable site office for a local construction company, Powers Construction. Patrick and I have been photographing a lot of his construction sites over the course of the last 5 or so years, and I love it because I get to hang out with the crew. It takes me back to those childhood days in Dad's house. Again, I don't get any more salami, but they're generally nice to me, which is good. And I get a lot of joy out of going onto these sites because I get to hang out again with some some really fun people, and I get to see these people that are passionate about their own work actually making these buildings of architecture. But there's a lot of people that make a building that you live in, like you're in your house. Imagine how many people worked on the house that you're living in. It wasn't just one person that designed it. There were probably over 100 people that helped build that house. So this little project is called the Site Shack. And it is literally a site shed for his site superintendents to work from. And he designed it. We were talking, and we through discussion we conceptualized that it's portable, and we should make some images of it that would showcase this portability. So we had to think how to do this, and I made some sort of normal, well, I say normal, but like I covered all the usual bases: details, interiors, and then we took it somewhere. And the next slide is a little video. It might not play perfectly smoothly over the GoToWebinar, but it's on my website, so if you want to see it, you can go there or on Vimeo. And I think there's some audio. The audio might come through. Here you go. So I made that in conjunction with one of my team members. He's a videographer, amazing guy, came out of skateboarding videos, Jevon, and that was a lot of fun. And in doing it, like there was a whole lot of things we were conceptualizing at the start, and again, notes from my notebook are romance and escape, contemporary form, remote, simple, and journey. And then, you know, like it's gone to this amazing place, and then it comes back to site. This is 6 months later, in the middle of snow, January. Again, in fact, I think this was before the last project, so this is the IQ4 as well. So I want to just move on quite quickly into a question. It's like, how many of you have asked yourself, Walter, is there something? I can't hear you, Walter.
Is this a good time for questions, or are you ready to come to that?
Yeah, we'll roll through this section and then do questions.
Okay, good.
Why do you make photographs, and what's your vision behind your own photographs, or the photographs you make for your clients? I'm interested in sharing the benefits and the impact of architecture to the general public, and part of my core purpose is helping people understand how the architecture's gone together. You know, and in 2018, I had an opportunity to take a series of photographs to an exhibit at the Architecture Biennale in Venice, and the series is called Then and Now, and it's a study of architecture during the process. This is the Langara College by Teeple. It juxtaposes these moments. The section's called Then and Now. It juxtaposes these ephemeral then moments of architecture with these now moments of the finished architecture. The now moments were all printed at like 60% the size of the then moments. So the construction actually took precedence over the finished work. So I'm just going to flick through these. This is from a cherry picker, and interestingly enough, almost exactly the same position. This is the Kwantlen University in Richmond. So the light changes, the depth of space changes so significantly. This is up in the Yukon. The building underneath the plywood is actually the oldest building in Whitehorse. It's it was a museum. That was the McBride Museum, and then they needed more space. So the architect Jack was like, well, why don't we just cantilever over the old building? This is my now moment that sort of references that move. This is a wonderful house in Vancouver, and the custom site hoarding or the fencing that you see on the front was reused to the interior of the garage. In the past, this would have just been landfill. So there's a real sustainability note here that I think is important. You know, the house had a heap of craftsmen on it, including these steel guys who made this stunning stair. If you're interested in the video work that I've done, there's an entire video on the then and now of this house, which I made with Measured and Powers Construction, amazing collaboration. And it really talks about the craft of making a house, which is interesting. So the next section is sort of technique and equipment, Walter, so why don't we just pause up here.
We're pausing right here. We have quite a few questions. I want to try and get through a bunch of them here. So are you always using natural available light?
If I was to give it a percentage, I'd say it's like 85 to 90%. You know, with an exterior, we obviously can't overpower the sun. Interiors, we'll use it to accent if we feel it's necessary. It's a creative decision, really, at the end of the day.
Okay. Another question is more a personal one. It's saying you have amazing clients. You seem to work with only top-level architects. I'm wondering if you can speak to the journey from a hobbyist to someone who's being sought after within the industry.
That's an interesting question.
It's difficult, you know.
Yeah.
But...
Yes and no. I think the word I'd say is patience. Like patience and sort of, and are willing to grow with clients. Like don't look for those big, like, you know, a firm that's got offices all around the world. If you come up to them at the start with, and they do towers, if you come up to them at the start with a portfolio of houses, they're not going to even organize a meeting with you. You know, so grow with the people you enjoy working with, I think would be the most important thing.
Okay, for exterior shoots, how picky are you about weather, time, season, and how many sessions do you make per project typically?
Project dependent. The weather one's an interesting one because, for instance, I do a lot of work in Australia, and I do the majority of my work in Canada, but I do work in Australia, and the kind of light you want for the buildings is very different there. Like in Australia, the architecture is designed around sheltering from the sun. And in BC, the architecture is designed around letting the sun in, you know. Right. So we are quite picky, but at the same time, we try not to let it rule ourselves. But if I want a particular kind of light for the building, like the job in Prince George, the training facility, like that wanted hard light because of the materials. A tower like this, or the one I showed earlier, like that'd be fine in soft light. It depends on what you want to evoke. So larger buildings will be more than one visit, for sure.
Next question is post-processing are you doing, and how much of it is in Capture One versus, let's say, Photoshop?
So all the raw work is done in Capture One. If there's any retouching, say as like deleting that construction sign that the contractor didn't move before we got there to photograph it, that's all done in Photoshop, but the majority is Capture One.
The other question is an interesting one because it's hard to tell, which I think is a a really critical thing for everybody to appreciate, but the photos are taken in just one shot, or are almost all of them many shots? Are they all stitched?
This one, I'll get onto this one in the technique section, but this one is a stitch. I'd say it's about a 50-50, and it depends on what I'm trying to convey, you know, like, yeah.
Okay. Are you using custom profiles, or are you working with a color checker, or do you know, what do you do for white balance? Again, contextually, there's a lot of people not necessarily working with the phase one tool. So I think, Andrew, it's important to kind of explain some of that.
Yep, we carry a color checker around with us, and where we think it's necessary, we'll use it. The nice thing about doing interiors of architecture is they often have white walls, so you've got a reference to it. I'm a big believer in light has color. I'm sure everyone out there has seen, there's sort of a, I suppose, a look to architectural photography which has come out of real estate, that the walls are all perfectly white. They've just pulled the color out of them. Like, to me, and this is a creative thing, I don't like that, because there's no atmosphere to it, right? So going on that, if we're shooting the interior of a space, it's more that, how does it feel? So, like, you know, the lights might be 4400 Kelvin, but I might end up tweaking it to 4600 because it just feels better, you know, and it hasn't dynamically changed the real color of, say, the furniture in the space or anything like that.
So in terms of like color temperature, are you using the color temperature sliders in Capture One to do that? Like, you just mentioned specific color temperature, so you play with those numbers, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
In that
the back's set 5,000. I don't use anything in the back. I never have in any of my cameras. I just have it set to 5,000, so there's a constant.
Right.
I'll correct that. If we're doing a job for a lighting designer, I'll specifically ask them what the color temperatures of the lighting was and set it to that before the camera to that beforehand.
Okay, there's also a lot of questions about stitching, because I'm trying to combine a few different questions here, but it seems a lot of people are confused. You're shooting with 150 megapixel back, yet you're stitching, and people saying, well, you know, do you need that with the higher resolution backs? And I don't think there's an understanding here of the optical difference. So maybe you can discuss that a little bit here. Sure. That's some great examples.
Actually, the next couple of slides are really good for this, but I'll preamble that. Perspective is about position. It's where you're standing. And you talked about this a little bit at the start, Walter. You know, if I, in this particular photo that's on the screen, if I took a step, 2 steps to the right, 2 or 3 steps to the right, that pole was suddenly going to move into the frame. Now I could step back further and then use a longer lens. Okay, so I determine how I want to make the photograph by where I want to be, and then I work out what lens it is. Now, sometimes I'll need to stitch to make it wider in one direction.
So just to be clear, you're stitching for the optical effect, not the pixels. Pixels are irrelevant in this case.
I don't need more than 150 megapixels.
I think that's the important distinction.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a personal question. So I think it's important to pepper these. So you're surrounded by architects and designers in your family. Do you think that affects the way you look at structures? What if you weren't surrounded by designers all your life? So someone's asking, like, okay, Andrew, so you haven't been immersed in architecture. How do you get there, right? So first question is, do you think it affects the way you look at structures? And second thing, how does someone else learn to get there? I think that's the real question. It's personal and it's difficult.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, I'll go to the personal side first. Like, my mum was an author, right? And she was an investigator. Like, she loved to research her subjects, and then she'd write these beautiful, eloquent, so telling bits of prose about people and about what they did. But right. She did that through a deep investigation. Like, she was a journalist initially. She did that through a deep investigation. I have that deep investigation. If you're wanting to get and understand architecture more, investigate. You know,
So you're
go
saying
out.
eat it, read it, sleep it, find
Yeah.
everything you can, research it.
Yeah, and ask yourself questions about it. Like, well, I'll get into this at the end, but like, how do you respond to it? Why does it make you feel that way? You know, because then when you do start talking to architects or interior designers or contractors as clients, you can talk about these things and talk about with them with some confidence, because then you can have a constructive conversation.
Right. Okay, so we're going to go through a bunch of quick tactical ones. Do you ever shoot tethered?
Uh,
How collaborative are your shots? Like, how much is the client weighing in?
Depends on the project. An interiors project, the client is often there and involved in much more depth. We'll have a discussion about styling and all sorts of things. And like sometimes we're in some houses, like the furniture that's in the house is all gone, and then new furniture's come in, and that's all been the client. And so we'll have a discussion about that. Yeah.
This is an interesting question because again, it's experiential, right? So there are many people who have never worked with a technical camera, a view camera, never worked with movements outside of a tilt shift lens, which is a pale comparison to the kind of control we really have. So I'm going to read the question in full, then I'm going to try and put a context on it. But it says, with a technical camera, you can straighten walls easier than with a DSLR. Do you know how to set the percentage of correction to 100 rather than, let's say, 80%?
That's a Capture One specific question, because I know that.
I'm thinking it could be a capture question as well, because you know the level of limitation that we have, let's say, with a technical camera is far less than you would have with a tilt shift lens. You know, and
so
you know,
if you want things to be 100% perspective, 100% perspectively correct, the first thing is find your spot, like, because that's going to give you your frame and your atmosphere. The second thing is get your tripod head bang on level.
right.
Now, if you've got your tripod head bang on level and centered on something, and you've worked out what you're centered on because you found your spot already, you can point any lens at it, and provided you've got a lens distortion correction, everything's going to be straight.
Okay. We're going to keep running with a bunch of these. Do you have any tips for protecting your camera and lenses from condensation and cold? I mean, you showed some crazy images there of how your guy.
So literally, when the one with the tripod head that was frozen, we walked out of the airport. We've come from quite humid BC to dry Prince George, and I put the Rodenstock 32 on my camera, and I hadn't bagged it because I haven't done this for a couple of years, and it just didn't occur to me. And literally, it fogged up inside, and I freaked out. Okay, so that was the precursor to why the next day we ran 2 systems.
Right.
Okay, it was like, I'm not gonna let this slow us down. We've only got a couple of days here. You're outside, you're inside. So that's the simplest way. The other way is to literally Ziploc bag them all.
Right. So it's just getting a bunch of, even if it means getting those turkey-sized Ziploc bags and just letting things acclimate. All right. Another one. Hi, Andrew. Do you plan ahead to the point of needing only a few images to capture your intent, or would you explore many experiments and review post to express more intent or the intent?
Can you say that again, Walter?
I think the question is really saying, like, you pre-think a lot of your shoots, but when you're there, do you sometimes explore the subject further than you originally intended?
Yeah, totally. And like, it changes all the time, right? I might have this plan put in place, and then we get different light, or we get a truck parked in front of the building. So okay, you can't do that at 3 o'clock. We'll come back to that later. And you find things like there's a point, like when you're working with one of these projects and you're there for a number of days, that you end up having a conversation with the architecture, and it literally starts talking back to you. Well, it does to me anyway.
No, but it's there is something that happens there in that relationship of you appreciating what's there. Okay, so
more stuff. It's great.
Straight technical. I mean, the phase 1 XF camera, the the couple shutters on your Arca Swiss, you're dealing with leaf shutters. So this question is a leaf shutter question. Do your leaf shutters ever freeze open when you're in the Yukon?
They haven't, actually. I was amazed. Like that first job I showed, the one with that had a camera on the hat, like that was the first time I'd ever photographed in below -30. And the Arca did better than the 35mm setup did. Actually, I snapped a tether cord on that trip.
All right.
Let's get back into the
session. Andrew, let's move on to more of your presentation.
Okay, thanks. Thanks everyone. They're good questions. How do I? Okay, so we've done a little bit of talking about technique and equipment, but I'm going to talk a bit further about it because it was the next section. And like I've always been a bit of a techno geek, whether it's related to like rowing boats, bicycles, computers, or camera gear. I guess it's part of me wanting to know where I've come from, and it's a healthy geek question to look at something and ask myself, how can this new thing actually help me do something that I couldn't do before? And lenses are a big thing for that. Camera equipment is a big thing for that. I'll look at something and I'll go, is that actually going to let me do something that is interesting or that I couldn't do with what I have right now? Now, I referenced the IQ4 a little bit, and I showed that image where I could put the Canon lens on it. That's been quite a big thing for me. So this image was literally, I think this was photographed on a Sony A7 and I stitched the 17 to get the image circle that I wanted, because I wanted more on the left and I wanted it to be a 4:5 aspect ratio. Then when Walter came out and I test drove the IQ4, I worked out I could put the 17 on the IQ4. And this is the image we made that day, Walter. So these are all this was April 1st, 2018. This is April 1st, 2019. And this is last week. Okay, so the building's progressing. This is part of this whole interest that I have, but the equipment's letting me do different things. I literally just got an adapter for the Arca. I haven't told you this, Walter, so I can put a Pentax 645 lens on the front of it, because there's a 300mm lens they made, which is amazing, and I haven't got a really, really long lens, so I bought the adapter so I can test that, and if I don't like it, I'll probably sell the adapter, but it's just, you get to explore, you get to try different things. I used to keep and I still do keep a large variety of filters in my bag, NDs, grads, and polarizers and things. Last year, there was a feature in the IQ4 that came out that was called frame averaging, which in essence does what an ND filter does in some instances. And this is a good example of it because it's totally smoothed that water out up on the right-hand side of the image. And if you look sort of top left, there's a whole lot of reflected light that's come off the water that was like those really ugly patterns you get when water reflects, right? So what this frame averaging does, and Walter, you might talk to this later a bit, is the exposure for this was 125th of a second, and I think I set it for a minute, and it just ran 125th second exposures and layered them up into a single raw file for a minute and gave me this look.
So this is essentially the finished image.
This is essentially the finished image.
You didn't have to do much beyond just capture it. Yep.
And this is the same. It had some ugly bounce, same building, because this is the first time I think I'd just upgraded the firmware. So there was ugly bounce light up there. We're back up in Prince George in September, and this is a very static image, but like a 10-second frame average just gave me a little bit of motion and sort of just gave it a little bit of energy that I wanted. This is an airport image. Airports are like this transient sort of place. I'm going to assume that everyone here has been in an airport, and we all know this feeling about sort of moving, about sort of lining up in that queue and then going on the plane one by one, and then you're gone and you're not in the airport anymore. So I use the frame averaging here just to evoke that sort of sense of transience. This is last week, supermoon, and I show this because the other benefit of frame averaging is it greatly reduces the noise in the image. Like, I mean, it was super bright out there. This is a, what have I written here? It's a 5-minute frame average. The settings were f4 at 1600 ISO in 5 seconds. So it did, what, 60 exposures? If you zoom in, you can see little star trails in it. But if you zoom in like on this area here, can you see my mouse? No, you can't see my mouse. Hang on. Here we go. If you zoom in on like this area here,
yeah.
You see that?
The pointers work.
Yeah, the noise, there's no noise. Yeah, and this is like 3 a.m. in the morning. Like, so it's, we pulled it down in exposure as well, I think, as well. So, yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of flick through some recent work for a little bit. And then we can go into some more questions, I think, Walter. Okay. Yep. This is a new office building in Vancouver, and the red pavilion next to it's going to be a cafe, which will be finished not too far away, I don't think. And I waited, this is an example of how many times you visit a building. The first day we were booked and we had to do interiors as well, it was like slate blue skies, which really doesn't work that well for a glassy building. But the next week I got the sky that I wanted, and I knew that these shading fins on the south, which is the right hand side facade, were beginning to make this shape at this kind of day. So I booted over there in the car, got this image, and we got this image, which is more about that glass. I needed clouds for this. Okay. In the last year I've been sort of lucky enough to photograph a couple of fire stations, which again sort of relates back to this idea of, like, I think healthcare, social housing, and all these sort of first responder like kind of pieces of architecture are just so important to life for us. Like, and we don't give them enough credit. They're not often super sexy, but the fire crew on the day they had a new training facility and they put a training exercise on. So we got in with them, right? And I mean, I never want to be in a fire. After doing this, never want to be in a fire.
It's a pretty serious commitment on this shot, you know.
Sorry, what's that?
That's really, really some serious commitment to this shot.
Yeah. I didn't even think to ask for an oxygen mask either. It was my bad. But this is a social housing building in Melbourne, and it provides food and accommodation for people that need help, and it has drop-in overnight, everything to the people on the top 2 floors can have a house for a year and they get a letterbox at the time. So it provides a lot of good for the world, right? It's got a tough exterior. It's got a kitchen and a cafe inside where people can drop in and feel safe, and they can still see the outside world but feel safe that they're not being seen by the outside world, which is really important. And it's on a really busy thoroughfare opposite the Children's Hospital in Melbourne. So we really wanted to show it in context of it being like this main thoroughfare. This is a house in North Vancouver, and I don't know, I've always had a thing for triangles. I don't know why. So I had a lot of fun with this house. It's nestled in the forests of West Vancouver. This is the 17, and I have cropped this. This is the 17 on the Arca. Again, the only way I could get this actual image. I tried stitching the 32 and it just wasn't wide enough. And the really clever thing about this building, and you can see it transitioning from this image to the next image, is the junction of these fingers is like a double height space where the kitchen is. So how we sort of show that without showing it was really important, and to let the greenery and the forest colors pour in. So again, I'm talking about this, like white isn't white. White has a color, okay, because it reflects. I'm going to show a couple of train stations here from both sides of the equator. This is in Melbourne, Australia. super colourful, like MGS, the same architects as that social housing building, and they've got like a real flat colour, and it always makes their projects a like, wonderful to photograph. But this one was, they lifted the railway station, the railway lines, so that the traffic could move underneath. That was the whole, there used to be a level crossing there, so there was lights. So we had to knit it into the fabric. And the light on the interior was really just calm, soothing and cool. And yeah. And then here in Vancouver, this is an addition to the main railway station, and they lifted it to get people from one line to the other. Okay, so again, so I'm showing the sort of the dominance of traffic versus people versus trains, like how they interrelate with these. And this wanted to let the light in. The grid actually references the Expo line, which is 1980s architecture, which is the original part of this train station. So the new architect took that grid, and how do we show it in relation to a train station? We let the light come in and create some shapes on the ground. A completely different train station, a glassy, modernist, clear, succinct box. This is actually 2 minutes away from that, in Surrey, from that first image I showed with all the people in it. And I love what McFarlane Bigger did here, because it's a very comforting space. I had an image that I had to pull because I got an editorial deadline, but on it. But this is me making a photograph, and this is just about camera position. How do you find the right position? You do what you have to do to get it. Okay. This is a small and wonderfully restrained building, Javier Campos. Just everything's so well thought out. It's a place to make music in the backyard in Vancouver. He's a composer, so he just needs a small spot where he can make his music, but he can stay in touch with his family at the same time. Everyone likes being allowed to go airside. Well, if you get to, that is. And everyone loves a good reflection. And you've just got to let the structure do its thing, you know. We made this same image as a dusk image where you could see all the way through, and they're so different, right? So different. And I prefer this one. And this is it from the interior looking out. This is in Nanaimo. It only opened a month or two ago. But you've just got to let the architecture and the structure talk to you. Like, what is it telling you to do? And you don't always have to show everything. This is in Melbourne, and the architectural reference is pretty obvious, I think, especially if you've got kids like me. Like, it hurts when you step on it. But I was really interested in the hidden spaces, you know, like, and how they got used. You know, this is the middle of the day and the middle of the week, and it's on an intersection that was completely monochromatic. So to that question relating to black and white, well, yes. I mean, I called this image monochrome Lego, and it was, yeah, it won a couple of awards, which was really nice. This is quite an old image now, I think, but it speaks to the history of Vancouver architecture. Like, we've got a modern tower in the middle, or nearly in the middle, and there's buildings of every era, every decade within the frame. So it talks about like an outlook and a moving forward and progression. Okay. This building's about a knife. Like, it's just this. This is the Shangri-La in Vancouver, and I was asked to photograph it, and it had been photographed before, and I sort of said, well, why hasn't it been photographed from there? And we worked out how to get access to that roof, and because it is just like a blade. We've talked about seasons and time of year, and I mean, this is a bus shelter up in Whistler, and you just got to think about how the light can change the atmosphere, can change the feeling. We went to this one twice, partly because they wanted to enter it into some wood awards to show how it was, and I was like, well, it's designed to take a snow load. We have to shoot it with some snow on it, but they needed some summer shots beforehand. This is nestled within the Australian bush. The house has amazing views of Wilson's Promontory, and it's got a very, very clear architectural experience. As you twist your way up into the living space, you get these views of Wilson's Prom. Okay. You get to relax. And we come back to that tree that I talked about at the start. And that's sort of where we're at. There's another spot here for questions, I think, Walter, and then I've got something I want to leave everyone with.
Okay, so we've got a lot of questions, and we're getting close to our time. So let me get through a few of them. I have an unusual one. It's from a student, someone who's actually gone through the process. I went to photo school, and there was a sense that somehow architectural photography was seen as less than the other disciplines in photography. It was viewed as simple snapshots, and students believed there was very little effort and it was easy to do. Do you encounter this type of attitude, or did you encounter this earlier in your career? And if so, how do you overcome that, or how did you overcome that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one within the profession, because I mean, I've got other photographer peers and they just say, I could not do what you do. So I'm not sure what the academic side of it is. It has always been a very niche part of the industry. And I think part of that was because the entry level, just from an equipment point of view, was always like, when you're carrying around a 4x5 or an 8x10, like, you can't just go and rent those now. You know,
Right.
You can go and rent a shift lens now and get almost the same kind of movements and same perspective control as we can with my technical camera. So you actually have access to experience it more. But I think, you know, I don't know why the educational institutions are talking like that. So I haven't experienced that.
Okay, let's kind of move on to the next one, and that's and maybe just before we do, we can clarify something in that although things are rented, when I did my introduction, I said, you know, as photographers, we approach things almost like a rabbit hole. We go into this rabbit hole and we explore a subject deeply. Andrew, you've explored architecture so deeply that your insights are different from everyone else's, and I think that might be part of the answer. Do you pitch yourself to architects, or are you approached by them? That was the next question, sir.
Let me just jump in there, because I mean, I went through architecture school, and I did go through photography school as well. But when we went through architecture school, we would get professional architects in to come and critique our work. Now, I know some photography schools do that. I've only been asked once or twice to come in and critique work, and it's always an amazing experience for myself. It's actually really invigorating for myself, because you see these young, passionate people, you get to work with them and you get to help them.
Right.
But it's always really good. And I would encourage any academic institution out there that has an architecture side to their photography to give someone in Toronto, give someone in LA, wherever they are, give them a call, you know.
So back to the question that was, do you pitch yourself to architects, or are you approached by them?
There's a combination of both.
All right. There's a lot of people are saying how much they like your work, so you need to hear that, just as some positive feedback there. Do you always shoot video as well? And if not, how did you decide to shoot video? Like, how do you handle that process?
Video has been, for me, a creative endeavor, and it's, to answer it, I shoot video whenever I want to, or when I'm commissioned.
Right. Almost for your own purposes, in a sense.
Yeah, like it's an exploration. Okay, there's a number of videos on the site. I'd encourage people to jump on there and have a look. And I have a newsletter, so if people want to stay in touch and hear about the video work, there's a video newsletter coming out in a little bit. So I'll probably be able to answer a bit more questions then.
I think that there are a lot of people that don't totally understand the process, and I'm going to go on a limb here and say that a lot of people aren't familiar with the architectural brief saying kind of what the scope of the project is. So please take that into consider in this question. So do you find you have a lot of creative freedom to make the photographs that you want based on the client's needs, or have you encountered architects who want to direct most, if not all, of your photos? I mean, it's a variation on a question we had earlier, but I think it's important to make this distinction.
Yeah, I'm going to say I've got clients in both spectrums. The majority now, like as you develop a relationship with a client, whether it be an architect or whether it be an art director with an agency or something, with it comes a sense of comfort and a sense of understanding. Okay, and part of giving that comfort to your client is them knowing that you understand their needs.
Right.
So that comes back to that sort of that inquisitive side of things. You've got to understand what they need, and then often you might get there's always going to be half a dozen must-have photographs. You tick they're the things you have to tick off.
So those are the things you would say would be the brief, right?
Yeah. It depends on the project. Like, I mean, the job up in Prince George, we had a list of like 23 photographs, and the brief with McFarlane Bigger is, it's like, yeah, we really like it from this position. It doesn't tell you exactly where to put the tripod. That's up to you, and it doesn't tell you what time of day to do it. That's up to you. So you get to weave your creativity into that.
Right. Okay. Next question is, and perhaps this is again a little bit of a discussion about the technology we're using, but would you ever go so far as to change all the light bulbs in an interior shot to have good color?
It's getting, not anymore, because pretty much anything new build has been done with LEDs now from an energy savings point of view, and they are 95% consistent in color temperature. But I do remember, like, I think it's like 5 years ago, I did an exterior for a client, and I got them to turn the lights on in the building, and I swear there were 4 or 5 different color temperatures. It was a pain, you know, and we fixed it all in post. And back then, had I known that, we might have tried to change light bulbs out, because it was hours.
So it's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
Okay, this one's a little bit different, and this is a question more towards your process. How do you approach seeing the building and forming a vision of what you want to express when you first arrive at a location? So this is assuming you've never been there. You might have some site diagrams. You might have been able to not even see some photographs of the place. So how do you inform yourself? What do you do? Do you do a site walk? Do you do, like, talk about that process?
Yeah, I'm gonna, if there's anyone on here who's a subscriber to Medium Format Magazine, I actually just wrote an article for them about this very thing. So subscribe. If I have to travel, I'll always get there a day before, like flat out. Have to get there a day before. You have to see what's there. You know, the architect might have been up there 2 weeks beforehand and they thought everything was all right, and then, you know, there might have been suddenly the power company's come in and they've got a half constructed power pole in front of the building or something like that. You've got to get there a day before. So you can get to know it. Yeah.
All right, let's go on with this session, and we'll do one final question session at the end.
Yeah. So this last little bit is really just about revisioning your own work. And I mentioned at the start, I go through and there's no images here, I'm afraid. I go through a process every year to try and self-critique. And we've all been given this time now, so I'd encourage you to, if you can, write these questions down. If not, I'll pass these questions on to Walter and Francesca, and maybe we can email them out. And they're more a series of statements. But you want to sort of say, my progression to my current state of photography has been, I was an architect who grew up in Australia amongst the built environment. I came to love architecture. I kept my passion for photography going. And now I get to make photographs of things that I love with people that are really interesting every day. How did I get here? Okay, I'm not going to answer all of them, but photography is important to me because Okay. The kind of images or photographs I like to make are, the qualities of these photographs are, this is important to me because, like, there's got to be something important in what you make. Otherwise, you're not bringing anything to it. You've got to do that. The kinds of photographs my clients need are, you know, because as a commercial photographer, or even if you're a fine art photographer, your client is the art buyer. Okay. The kinds of images or photographs my clients need are the qualities of these and the important to me because, and this is where we start to think, where are we going? The kind of images and photographs I want to make are like, where have you come from? What are you doing that you like? What do your clients or your buyers like? How do those interrelate? Where do I want to go? Same set of questions, okay? So I would encourage everyone to maybe take a screenshot of this, or we can send these out, but give yourself half an hour, and just sit down. Don't necessarily do this. I encourage you to have a go with this or find something like this, but just spend a bit of time revisioning what you're doing, because we've got time now as photographers to do this. Usually I'm chasing the next job and I'm finishing up this job and doing this and that, and I've now got time to think.
You know, Andrew, I saw you speak at the photo festival in Vancouver a few years ago, and you ended your session with this collection of questions. I'd like to say we're going to find a way to email this out to everyone, but I also would like to say to people that when you did that, I took this to heart, you know, and I myself a few years ago rethought a lot of what I was doing, which made a huge impact on how I was doing my own work. And I would like to say that for all of you out there who have no interest in architecture or are not looking at that, these questions are just as relevant to you in any discipline of photography. And they're the kind of questions I think that can lead us all to be much more mindful of the process and the things we can bring to the table. And that's something I have to thank you for, Andrew. You really brought a huge level of mindfulness to my work in a way I was unable to do before. So keep going. Sorry, I had to stop.
That's where we're going to leave it. So if there's any more questions, let's dive into some questions.
We do have a few more questions, and I think what we're going to do, we're just going overtime right now. We're going to try and keep it to about 5 more minutes, and I'm going to try and go through some of these questions, and we'll wrap it up. There's a lot of questions about frame averaging, and yep. You know, is frame averaging unique to Capture One? Well, it's actually in the back, right? So maybe Andrew, you could talk about a little bit about that. And the other question, I'm trying to combine multiple questions, is frame averaging like HDR? Can you just describe the frame averaging and maybe, because it's almost an extension of it, the dual expose plus technology is an example.
Yeah. The real, in digital photography, people have been doing a semblance of frame averaging for many years to reduce noise. They'll take 10 photographs of the same image and then layer them in Photoshop and put them all on 10% opacity, and it does reduce the noise to some extent. The real difference about the frame averaging in the back is I get a raw file out of it, and I'm getting a little more dynamic range, so I can literally expose for the highlights, make sure I don't blow anything, and keep the noise down in the shadows. The dual exposure plus, which just came out, which is in beta, I think, that job I did on the full moon, which had snow outside, every interior I did was with the dual exposure. And for people that don't know what that is, again, you're going to expose for the highlights so you don't clip out the windows, which is the snow, really bright. And then it takes a second exposure that is 3 stops-ish, I think, more exposed. So again, you reduce the noise. We're just getting into the post-production of that job, and wow, like, it's simplifying my workflow again.
No, I have to say, in examples we've done here recently, we're able to take something that's 10 stops underexposed. We're able to open it up, give it a quarter tone, let's say. It's the correct color, and it has absolutely no grain or no noise. So it's pretty crazy, but you know, it's another tool. It's just another tool, right?
Yeah. And
let's
you
keep
can't use it in every instance. You can't use it in every instance. So you got to know when it's relevant to be creative, I think, and when it's relevant just as a tool.
Right. There are a lot of questions about the 35 mil because everybody assumes 35 mil only covers 35 mil. And you referenced the 17. I know the 24 is part of that list, and one of the zoom lenses. Can you talk about the image circle a little bit?
I'm just going to try and find it. Where'd it go? So I don't know exactly what the image circle of the 17 mil is. I mean, I do know that it covers the whole size of the phase 1 back sensor. What you need, there's a I'm trying to think who it is. One of the dealers in the States has got this image visualizer on their site. Walter, I can't remember who it is, and it really explains it
either. But there are a couple of them out there.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Basically, you draw yourself a circle, okay, and let's say it's that big. And imagine the 35 mil sensors in here. You can move the sensor around within that circle, and that helps you change the perspective. So you can use, by moving it around or shifting on the Canon lens with a 35 mil sensor, you can capture more of that image circle and then stitch it together. Okay. So when I was able to put that lens on the phase back, I actually capture all the image circle. So you don't
have to stitch it because you're capturing all 4 quadrants, let's say.
Yeah,
right?
And I've got 150 megapixels, so
you got lots of room. Okay, let's keep going. There's another question about how do you compose images through the camera? Do you use live view?
The first step in composing is walking around before the camera's even come out of the back and looking at how the shapes and the light and everything's interrelating. And I can literally tell you the height the camera is going to be at, almost to dial the lens that's going to be on it, just by walking around and working out where you are.
Now, when you're actually going to frame that shot, how do you do it? Do you use the live view, or how do you compose it?
Yeah, with live view. You know, it'd be if I was on the XF, it'd be through the viewfinder, but on the Arca, it's through the live view. Yeah, which is a hell of a lot better than it used to be on the CCD backs. Yeah.
Okay. Do you use focus stacking?
With the XF, yeah, and I can with the Arca. I haven't much with the Arca, but the last couple of years I've been asked to photograph a whole series of architectural models. So like buildings that, you know, this big.
Static.
Yeah, and I don't own a whole swathe of lenses for my XF, but when I rent them from you, Walter, and like the focus stacking is phenomenal. Like, because yeah.
How often do you use a polarizing filter, or do you use a polarizing filter?
A polarizer will get used more on the interiors than it will on the exteriors for me. I generally don't like what a polarizer does to a sky a lot of the time. I like my skies to sort of just be quite calm and natural and let the building stand. I'll use it inside to cut reflections on materials more than anything. Okay,
now this is a very important business question, and if you can spend a bit of time on this, I think it would be important. Copyright and licensing, right? Mm-hmm. Often clients want to share images with consultants. Do you support licensing to each third party, or do you share the overall cost between everybody?
If people come on board at the start, it's a cost sharing relationship, but let's take an interior photo as an example. The flooring manufacturer or the furniture supplier is not going to want 20 photographs. So they will potentially come in later and license 1 or 2. There's a wonderful website that Mike Kelly in the States has organized called AP Almanac. And he, I think last year, wrote an amazing article on how to license and cost share. And it is very close to the industry standard. And I would send everyone there, AP Almanac, Architectural Photographer Almanac. Yep. Fantastic.
Okay. There's a number of questions for LCCs, so I'm gonna try and ask you 2 different questions. With the IQ4, are you still shooting LCCs?
Yeah, I am. Yep. I don't have to, but I am, because quite often I'm making really, really big movements. And so I'm going right to the edge of the image circles, pushing them into the sky.
So you're trying to push optics.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I'm doing it for light fall off. And actually, since I got the center filters for the 60 and the 43, I almost don't have to anymore, Walter. But I'm not doing it for color cast like I used to have to do.
Now you're doing it to pick up that extra bit of optic that might otherwise. Okay. And then there's a question specifically with the 17. If you're using the 17, how do you do an LCC?
I'm about to go and buy a really big bit of white plastic. And some guys,
it's one of those conundrums, right?
Yeah, there's some guys in the States, Photodiox, that make a set of, and make 145 mil polarizer for the 17, and it comes with like a filter holder. So I need to get my bit of white plastic that's bigger than 145 mil square, and then I can hold it on the front.
The other question is, a lot of people think that you need to use an LCC automatically to do stitching, and so I say, are you using LCCs for all the stitches and stuff? And it sounds like sometimes you are, sometimes you're not.
Yeah.
All right. I think that wraps it up. I think this is the end of our time together. Andrew, I have to tell you again, for any of you who missed the introduction, I felt very much like I was introducing Andrew to a technical camera and a view camera, and that was back in 2013. By 2015, you were teaching me things, and today you've had a huge influence on my work, which is such an amazing experience to go through. So Andrew, thank you very much for doing this, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. So that's it. And any last comments, Andrew?
Just like to say thanks to yourself, Walter, for hosting this, and again, phase one, Francesca and Wayne, like, it's been great. I love working with you guys, like it is a family. And thanks to all you people out there for coming in and listening to my weird accent for a little bit. I hope it was understandable, and I hope you've got some takeaways from it, because it's
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.